He disappears just when it gets good. He returns just when you've let go. He avoids the future but won't close the door. And somewhere between his silence and his reappearance, you begin to question not just him, but yourself. Freud would call this a pattern of repetition, a loop where the unconscious replays unresolved tension, hoping this time the ending will change. But it never does. At least not while the roles remain the same. To understand why he avoids commitment but keeps coming back, you must stop asking what he wants and start asking what his unconscious needs. Because this is not logic. This is repetition compulsion. In Freud's view, the psyche is not interested in clarity, is interested in familiarity. Even if that familiarity is painful, even if it leads to sabotage, the unconscious prefers the known wound over the unknown risk. So when a man avoids commitment, what he's often avoiding is not you. It's the emotional regression that intimacy requires. To commit is to expose the self. And many men, especially those emotionally underdeveloped or shaped by maternal inconsistency, equate exposure with loss of control. He disappears because staying requires surrender. And surrender, for him, feels like annihilation. But he comes back, not because he's changed, but because something in him still wants the medicine, even if he's terrified of the cure. He wants the warmth, the recognition, the mirror, but only in doses small enough not to activate his buried fears. You become, in this loop, the regulator of his shame. He touches you when he feels empty, and pulls away when you make him feel too seen. Because to be seen, for a man still haunted by rejection or engulfment, feels like danger. Freud might say he is caught between the push of the ID, the unconscious desire for intimacy, warmth, and approval, and the pull of the superego, which punishes desire with guilt or fear of entrapment. So he hovers. He orbits. He sends breadcrumbs not to lead you somewhere, but to keep you nearby without crossing into the terrain that threatens his emotional structure. This isn't cruelty. This is survival. But the cost of his survival is your clarity. And so you stay in the fog. You analyze. You adjust. You wait. And he keeps coming back, not because you're weak, but because your presence offers relief. Temporary, soothing, familiar. You are his emotional analgesic, the place where his defenses can rest just long enough to remember what safety might feel like. But he cannot sustain it, because he hasn't confronted the part of himself that equates commitment with collapse. He wants intimacy, but only if it doesn't cost him himself, which is impossible. And that's the paradox. He desires you more than he understands, but he fears losing himself in you more than he can admit. This is why he vanishes after closeness, why he jokes when things get deep, why he says, "I don't know what I want," but stares at you like he's starving. Because he is. But his hunger is inhibited by memory. Maybe he saw a parent give everything and fall apart. Maybe he loved once and never recovered. Maybe he was never allowed to feel as a boy, only to perform. And now, as a man, he doesn't know what to do with the part of him that feels too much. So he puts it on you. You become the holder of all his projected fears. The one who feels too much, wants too much, asks too much. But it was never too much. It was exactly the amount required to move through the wall he's built. He just doesn't know how to let it in. So he returns when the silence is too loud. Leaves when the closeness is too real. Returns again when the cold becomes unbearable. And you begin to mistake this loop for love. But it's not love. It's familiarity. It's trauma echoing through affection. And the more you accommodate it, the more it repeats. Because what you're offering, clarity, depth, presence, is exactly what his system was never trained to receive without threat. He wants to chase you, but only if you don't ask him to arrive. He wants to hold you, but only if it doesn't mean staying. He wants you near, but only when he feels in control of the distance. So how do you shift the power? Not by fighting the pattern, not by punishing his absence, not by explaining yourself again, but by doing what his unconscious never expects you to do. You break the familiarity. You stop waiting. You stop responding. You stop holding space for a man who only shows up when he's lonely, but disappears when he's required. Not out of bitterness, but because you've understood the truth. He is not confused. He is conditioned. And unless he faces that, he cannot love fully. So the first shift of power is silence. Not the silence of games. The silence of non-availability. He has to feel your absence without reassurance. He has to sit with the echo of the space he once occupied. He has to wonder. Because only in the vacuum, only in the stillness, can he hear what his own patterns have drowned out. That closeness does not have to cost him his freedom. That love does not have to be lost, that you are not the threat. But he cannot hear that when you keep absorbing the blow every time, he pulls away. So you stop absorbing, you stop decoding, you stop making room. And then something changes. Either he rises, slowly, clumsily, but consciously, or he fades into the very silence he once used to control you. Either way, you have shifted the power, because now you are the one choosing. She stops responding, not to punish, but to protect, not to provoke, but to return to herself. And suddenly the field shifts. He doesn't know why, but he feels it, a disturbance in the emotional current. The silence she leaves behind is not cold. It is echoing. Freud would describe this moment as the return of the repressed, a psychic tension that rises when the familiar pattern is interrupted. And in that silence, his unconscious scrambles for meaning. Because until now, her presence was predictable, her affection a constant, her availability a comfort. He was the one who moved in and out, who decided the rhythm. And she unknowingly danced to it. But when she withdraws, not out of anger but out of clarity, she breaks the cycle. And in doing so, she initiates something rare. Emotional reversal. Now he is the one left wondering. Now he is the one attuned. Now he is the one scanning for signals. And this reversal doesn't just affect the surface. It unsettles the unconscious. Because silence, when held with dignity, becomes a mirror. It reflects his absence. It reflects her value. It reflects everything he refused to feel, until now. He begins to question what he thought he understood. Her softness wasn't weakness. Her patience wasn't passivity. Her presence wasn't guaranteed. The silence reveals what her words never could. This is the paradox Freud understood deeply. The psyche resists what threatens its internal order. And when the emotional dynamic shifts, especially one that fed his avoidance, his system goes into symbolic disarray. He will rationalize. He will minimize. But he will feel it. Because silence doesn't just remove contact, it removes the emotional feedback loop he depended on to regulate himself. Her words used to soften his doubt. Her presence used to soothe his shame. Her responses used to prove he still mattered, even when he disappeared. Now, without her, he is left with the one thing he spent his whole life avoiding: himself. And what does he find there? Uncertainty, longing, regret. But beneath it all, something even deeper. A recognition of his own limits. This is the quiet power of the feminine when it stops explaining. It becomes reflective, not reactive. And men, who often run from emotional mirror, begin to see themselves. The silence says, you can no longer access me through pattern. You must now confront what you projected onto me. You no longer get the reward of my warmth without the cost of your truth. And it is this cost that defines the path ahead. If he is not ready to grow, he will pull back harder. If he is too ashamed, he will stay silent longer. But if even a part of him is willing to question, willing to evolve, then the silence becomes a threshold. A psychological invitation. Because what she's done is not punish. She's interrupted. And interruption, in the unconscious, is a gateway. Most men don't grow through conversation. They grow through contrast. And silence provides that contrast in full. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't beg. It doesn't defend. It simply is. And in that stillness, the man must choose. Does he move toward it and all the responsibility it requires? Or does he remain in the comfort of distance where no one truly sees him? This is the moment of emotional separation. Not a breakup. A break in the bond of illusion. The illusion that she will always be there. The illusion that her love is unconditional, even in the face of neglect. The illusion that he can keep his emotional world sealed off and still be desired. When that illusion collapses, he either regresses or he remembers. He remembers her kindness, her attention, the space she once held so openly. And he feels its absence, not as punishment but as loss. And loss, Freud tells us, is the birthplace of desire. Real desire, not lust. Desire born of longing for connection. Desire rooted in the realization, I had something rare, and I didn't meet it with care. This is when the man begins to reorient, not always visibly, sometimes slowly, awkwardly, with silence of his own. But if he begins the turn, it means the silence worked. Not because it changed him, but because it revealed him to himself. And that is the power she holds. Not to shape him, not to save him, but to mirror the gap and step back. Because the feminine, at its most potent, is not noise, is magnetism. And magnetism never chases. It draws. It waits. It selects. And when he returns, if he returns, it must not be to the same you. It must be to the woman who stopped dancing to his rhythm and started living by her own. Then and only then does the power shift fully. Because now he doesn't return to avoid himself. He returns to meet you. And that is the beginning of real change. He's not just responding to you. He's responding to something older than both of you, a memory, a pattern, a wound. Freud called it repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to replay emotional scripts from childhood, hoping that this time the ending will be different. But the characters remain the same, and so the pain repeats. When a man avoids commitment but keeps coming back, it's rarely about you. It's about the role you unknowingly stepped into. You became the mirror, the caretaker, the exception, the temptation, the mother he couldn't please, the lover who sees too much, the woman who might finally stay, or leave just like the rest. He doesn't know he's doing it, but he is. And unless you become conscious of the role you've taken on and is unconscious, the cycle will continue. You will soothe him, and he'll flee. You will withdraw, and he'll return. You will forgive, and he'll forget. You will anchor, and he'll drift. Not because he doesn't care, but because you've become a symbol, not a person. And symbols can't be loved. They can only be used by the psyche to complete its story. This is the danger of emotional projection. He isn't committing to you because he isn't seeing you. He's seeing the idea of you. And that idea is stitched together from the ghosts of his past. The mother who hovered too close or vanished too soon. The teacher who praised him but shamed his feelings. The first love who wanted him but wanted more than he could give. And now here you are, open, present, patient. You think you're building something real. But in his emotional system, you've become a reenactment. And he both desires and resents you for it. Because if he lets you love him, he risks confirming the very thing he fears, that he is not enough. That intimacy means obligation. That closeness always ends in loss. So he keeps the connection just close enough to feel fed, and just far enough to avoid being devoured by old pain. And you, if you're not careful, become the rescuer in a loop that doesn't want to be healed. It wants to be repeated. You offer safety. He interprets it as pressure. You offer depth. He experiences it as drowning. You offer care. He translates it as control. Because it's not about you. It's about what you represent. And until you step out of that role, he cannot meet you as a man. He can only circle you as a child, terrified, hopeful, confused. So how do you shift this? Not by explaining more. Not by proving you're different. But by no longer agreeing to play the part. You stop showing up in the same rhythm. You stop responding in the same tone. You stop giving comfort when all he offers is delay. You stop being the echo of his mother's unmet approval, or the opposite of her absence. You become neutral. Not cold, not cruel, but unavailable to the game. Because the game only works when you play your side. When you step away, truly step away, he is forced to face the truth. The role no longer exists. The projection has collapsed. You are no longer a mirror for his memory. You are simply gone. And now he has to ask himself, who was she? What did she really offer? What would it take to meet her as she is, not as I imagined her? This moment is what Freud would call the disruption of repetition. The point where the pattern meets resistance, not through confrontation, but through absence. You break the loop, not with force. You break it by becoming emotionally illegible to his old script. He can no longer read you as mother, savior, or threat. Because you are no longer performing softness in the face of neglect. You are no longer translating his avoidance as potential. You are no longer waiting for him to recognize what you already are. And this absence, this non-participation, creates a kind of psychic vacuum. Now he must choose. Will he remain a boy, addicted to the loop? Or will he rise as a man, conscious, clear, and able to see you without the veil of his past? Some won't. Some will disappear for good, because the role was the only thing tethering them. But others will pause, will grieve, will begin to see. And if that seeing turns to reaching, not out of hunger but awareness, then you'll know. The shift has begun. Not because he changed, but because you stopped being the symbol, and you became the self. He doesn't notice it at first. The change is subtle. Your responses slow down. Your tone shifts. The energy he used to drink from is no longer there. You haven't blocked him. You haven't screamed. You haven't begged. You've simply left the room, emotionally, energetically, psychically. And something inside him panics. Not in words. Not in conscious thoughts. In silence. In the body. In the primitive places of the psyche where attachment is felt, not named. Freud would call this the disruption of the object-constancy illusion, the unconscious belief that someone will always be there, no matter what, that their presence is permanent, that affection is unconditional. Most men rely on this illusion, especially in avoidant dynamics. They feel free to disappear because they unconsciously believe the door will always stay unlocked. They feel safe to withdraw because they know the warmth will always return. But when the woman detaches, not to manipulate, but to protect herself, the illusion begins to crack. And what emerges is fear. Not the fear of losing her body. The fear of losing her field. Because she was more than a person. She was a refuge. A pattern. A rhythm. And now she is gone. He might not admit it. He might mock it. He might replace her quickly, just to prove to himself that he's still in control. But the psyche doesn't lie. The psyche feels the absence. And it sends signals. He gets restless. He checks her page. He rereads old messages. He wonders if she's moved on, and why that thought stings more than expected. Because this isn't just ego. It's grief. Freud would say that grief arises not just from what is lost, but from what is finally understood too late. And that is what begins to haunt him. Not that she left, but that he never fully showed up. He remembers her patience. He replays her laughter. He hears the softness in her voice when he didn't deserve it. And now, without it, he feels exposed. Raw, unmoored, unfed. Because the energy she gave him wasn't just love, it was emotional regulation. She held what he couldn't. She translated what he avoided. She forgave what he never apologized for. And now the mirror is gone. And with it the illusion of who he was. Because here is the secret. She didn't just give him comfort. She gave him identity. He was the man she waited for. The man she believed in. The man she kept space for. And now that identity is gone. And he has to face what remains. A boy who never stayed. A man who never chose. A pattern that finally collapsed. This is where the real transformation begins. Not in her words, but in her withdrawal. Because withdrawal is not emptiness. It is information. It says, I'm not here to teach you anymore. I'm not a mirror for your confusion. I loved you deeply, and I left myself in the process. And he hears it, not as sound, but as absence. He'll feel the cold where there was once fire. He'll reach out, perhaps. A late message. A vague check-in. A subtle attempt to see if she's still holding the door. But if she's truly detached, not from anger, but from understanding, she won't reply the same way. And that reply, or lack of it, will burn. Because now the question is no longer, is she still there? The question is, why didn't I stay when it mattered? And that question echoes louder than any silence she could ever send. Freud believed the unconscious mind seeks repetition until the lesson is learned. But once the pattern is broken, truly broken, the unconscious is forced to evolve. It must find a new object, a new dynamic, a new way to relate. And some men will. Some will begin to reckon with themselves. They will return, slower, humbler, without the game. They will name what they couldn't before. They will sit with the discomfort they used to run from. But many won't. Many will retreat deeper into avoidance. They will blame. They will distract. They will repeat the cycle with someone new. But even then, even in new arms, they will remember. The woman who didn't fight to prove her worth. The woman who didn't explain her silence. The woman who simply stopped being available to the version of him that refused to grow. And that memory, that's the real power shift. Because it marks the first time he couldn't control the ending. And men remember the ones who broke the loop. Not with rage, not with games, but with the stillness of finally knowing their worth. He's used to knowing. Knowing she'll answer. Knowing she'll soften. Knowing she'll wait. There's comfort in her constancy, but not desire. Because desire doesn't live in certainty. It lives in tension, in movement, in mystery. And one day, she stops giving him that comfort. Not out of spite, but because she's no longer interested in being predictable. Not emotionally, not energetically, not spiritually. She no longer reacts the same way. She no longer performs stability in the face of chaos. She no longer offers access on demand. And something strange happens. His attraction intensifies. Not because she became cruel, but because she became unreadable. And in the unconscious, unreadability equals possibility. Freud might explain it through the pleasure principle, the drive toward what feels good, paired with the reality principle, which tempers it. But this is something deeper. This is the return of the symbolic feminine, not the nurturer, not the giver, not the savior. The mystery, The woman who no longer orients her behavior around his potential. Who no longer speaks in the tone that says, "I'll wait for you to realize." The woman who now speaks with unattachment. And the psyche, especially the male psyche conditioned to chase what it thinks it can control, does not know what to do with that. It scrambles. It leans in. It tries to decode. Because men don't chase women who beg. They chase women whose presence feels like a puzzle. Not because she plays games, but because she no longer plays the role. He asks himself, why did her tone change? Why didn't she answer this time? Why do I feel more uncertain and more drawn than ever? And the answer, though he can't name it, is this. Because she stopped being reliable in the way his emotional laziness relied on. She became emotionally unpredictable, not unstable, but sovereign. Her energy is no longer shaped by his absence. Her softness is no longer available on cue. Her warmth is now earned. And this changes everything. Because men do not long for the always there. They long for the once in a while, when that once is real. Men remember the woman who smiled when she wanted to, not when they needed her to. The one who answered slowly, not to play hard to get, but because she had other things to feel. The one who didn't ask for more, because she no longer had to beg for less. She became unpredictable not by design, but by detachment. And detachment, true detachment, is erotic. Not because it punishes, but because it removes the mirror. Now he cannot see himself through her eyes. He cannot feed on her approval. He cannot predict her rhythm. And this collapse of emotional routine, shocks the unconscious into alertness. He becomes more aware, more present, more attuned, because now her absence feels like something. Not punishment, not rejection, but mystery. And mystery is the oxygen of male desire. Not because it creates insecurity, but because it creates depth. Depth requires effort. Effort creates investment. Investment births meaning. And now, her presence has meaning. Not because she gave more, but because she gave less from a deeper place. This is what most women never understand. It's not silence that drives a man wild. It's the silence of a woman who used to explain and now doesn't. It's not distance that attracts him. It's the distance of a woman who used to wait and now walks. It's not change that breaks the cycle. It's the unpredictability of a woman who used to orbit him and now orbits herself. She becomes a new figure in his mind. No longer the good woman who holds space. She is now the free woman who holds standards. And that shift is permanent. He may try to pull her back into the old dance. He may try guilt, may try charm, may even try love. But if she's really gone, not in body, but in identity, then she is no longer his mirror. She is now his memory. And memory is the most seductive thing a man carries. Because you can't argue with it. You can't touch it. You can only feel its absence. So when she stops insisting, not because she's tired, but because she's awakened, she becomes the woman he thinks about at night. Not with anger, not with longing, but with wonder. Because men forget the woman who overexplained, but they never forget the one who disappeared into her own life.